Hello, everyone. Welcome back to I See What You're Saying, the Disciplined Listening Podcast. I'm Michael Reddington, and today we are going to talk about how we can all apply the key observational techniques that investigative interviewers use in all of their critical conversations. I can probably imagine that when people sit down and think about what does it look like when an interrogator is plying his or her trade, it might be easy to assume that that interrogator is biased and jaded and aggressive and accusatory and honed in on any indication of a lie so we can catch somebody lying and let them know that we're lying and use that to get the truth. I am here to tell you that thankfully, the overwhelming majority of the time, that is not the case. And it certainly was never the case for any of the teams that I had the privilege of working with. In fact, I came to learn pretty quickly early in my career that the most successful interrogators were strategic. They were empathetic. They were outcome focused. They prioritized the truth and had a hyper awareness to understand how everything going on around them impacted their ability to build the necessary relationships in order to be able to get the truth on the table. And when we start looking at our high impact conversations through that lens, now, whether we are talking with our family, whether we're talking with our employees, whether we're talking with customers, we could go job candidates, we could go on and on and on. And the conversations that matter the most to us, applying these observational techniques can pay huge dividends for us, helping us build relationships, solve problems, make better decisions faster, and of course, get the truth when we need it. So if we think about approaching a conversation like an interrogator would approach an interrogation, one of the first things we're going to do is make sure that we clarify our outcomes. So it could have been, what are the goals we're looking to achieve? What's the information that we need to do that? What additional evidence might we need to find? What appropriate laws or policies do we need to follow? What's the greater impact on the community or the organization? Who are we representing? All of these things that go in line. But for many of our everyday conversations, how does this conversation impact our long and short-term goals? What information can we get today, not just to solve what we think the problem is now, but either eliminate future problems or put us in a better position to identify future opportunities or solve future problems? How does what we do today impact all people involved outside of the room, either in the business or in the family or in the community, wherever it may be? Once we have those goals clearly identified and we understand the outcomes that we're ready to achieve, sometimes that it can even come down to plan A, B, and C. In a perfect world, this is what's going to happen and what we're going to walk away with. If that doesn't work, then maybe we end up with plan B, and if plan B doesn't work, hopefully we can still fall back on plan C. A good example of that from my interrogation career would be obviously plan A was we get a truthful written statement from the person responsible for whatever the unfortunate behavior was. That wasn't always going to happen. So sometimes a great plan B was to get a written statement that provided explicit detail that would be easily contradicted by whatever evidence we were able to compile after the conversation. We can still arrive at the same outcome. If somebody had done something they wouldn't, we can have them removed from the organization. But now it's not necessarily because they told us the truth about what they did. They got so locked into such specific dishonest statements that the evidence could prove that the opposite of what they said was true. So even understanding those plan Bs and Cs are going to be very important. Understanding the goals and outcomes makes it very easy to withhold judgment. One of the most important lessons I learned throughout that stage of my life and career was, but for the grace of God, go I. The vast majority of the people I spoke with were very good people that made regrettable decisions based on the situation they were dealing with at the time. That doesn't mean they're not accountable for their actions. That doesn't mean there aren't consequences or punishment. I'm not taking any of that off the table. But if we don't just stop and acknowledge up front that these are human beings that might have made a different decision if they were in a better situation, now we're lying to ourselves and we're honestly committing a disservice against all human beings. So withholding judgment and understanding that people and their decisions are impacted by so many different factors is another extremely important mindset to be able to carry through our conversations, which ties into the importance of separating the message from the messenger. All too often in investigations, we might find ourselves talking with somebody who we don't agree with, we might disagree with, we might even find some of the things they did or some of the groups they're a part of to be morally reprehensible. None of that matters, because our job in those conversations is to connect with another human being in a way that makes them comfortable to committing to sharing the truth. And sometimes, probably more than sometimes, we get very important information, very solid ideas, true statements that we might not have anticipated from people who we might not agree with or like. And if we don't develop the ability to separate the message from the messenger, we are already letting ourselves down. We're going to talk a lot coming up about a system for really enhancing the accuracy of our observations and getting true strategic value in these conversations. But to set the backdrop for that, we've got to say that the very best interviewers in the world understand that context is king, context is queen. I'm sure at some point we'll come back and we'll start talking about different verbal and nonverbal behaviors that we can listen and look for in these things. But there is no single behavior that's always indicative of truth or deception. It just doesn't exist. Also, a lot of the behaviors that are generally associated with deception are actually associated with discomfort. So we're already making a blanket assumption that people are uncomfortable when they lie to us and they're comfortable when they tell us the truth. And anyone that's done more than 5 interviews can tell you about a time that they talked with an honest person who looked very uncomfortable, or they talked with a dishonest person who looked very comfortable. So we know that these things can happen and these changes can sometimes surprise us. We have to elevate our contextual awareness so we're constantly cataloging how is what I'm saying and doing impacting the conversation? How is the environment and everything around us impacting this conversation? And now how do I adjust not only to make more accurate observations, but to account for the impact of everything that's going on around me today? And understanding that context in king is king or queen helps us maintain a learning mentality. There's always something that we don't know. Always. There's something that we're missing. There has never been an investigator that knew more about how a crime was committed than the criminal who committed it, unless the investigator was part of the crime to begin with. So it's very important that we go into, honestly, any important conversation with our children, with our spouses, with our employees, with our customers, our business partners, doesn't matter, in a learning mentality. Whatever's going on in the context could impact the situation. I better be willing to learn and adjust. There could be something going on in this person's personal life that I wasn't aware of. I better be willing to learn and adjust. Maybe I've been doing something previously that I wasn't aware of. We have to keep our mind open to the fact that there is almost certainly an idea, a perception, an experience, something out there that we're not aware of that could be impacting this situation. If we keep our antenna up, we're more likely to recognize that, factor it into our conversational approach, and be more successful. But if we go into any conversation assuming that we have it all figured out, we're now in a validation mentality, we're not in a learning mentality, and now we are most likely creating bigger problems for ourselves. So if we transition for time from a few key preparation considerations, mindset considerations, into actually setting up for the conversation, it is extremely important that whenever possible, to the degree that we have control or can create some influence, we want to set an optimal environment for the conversation. So I'm sure you've seen wonderful TV and movie episodes where there were people in a dark room on opposite sides of a metal table. Maybe somebody was even handcuffed underneath a swinging light bulb. That feeling doesn't motivate people to tell the truth. If we think about what a confession is, all a confession is sharing sensitive information under vulnerable circumstances in the face of consequences. Think about how many times a day we ask people to share sensitive information under vulnerable circumstances in the face of consequences. Any of our high impact conversations, we should be trying to use the environment to our advantage. So if you're a senior leader, a manager, an HR person, whoever it might be, probably don't have your most important conversations in your office because that feels like the police station. If you're mom or dad, maybe the kitchen table isn't always the best place because, again, that feels like the principal's office. Is it possible to Meet in a neutral conference room. Is it possible to go for a walk? Is it possible to get coffee? Is it possible to go out for a meal? Sometimes as parents, is it better to just go for a drive? And now you're talking in the vehicle where maybe your child is sitting next to you or behind you, and it feels less confrontational throughout the conversation. Use the environment to your advantage and use your position in that environment to your advantage. And when we say your advantage, that doesn't mean to exert some sort of dominance. That actually means to position yourself as equal. And position yourself in a way that not only amplifies your observation opportunities when that's applicable, but also does not add any stress. And if anything, makes the person you're talking to feel more comfortable and more relieved in the context of the situation. Every decision we make when it comes to getting the truth should be direct, should be helpful, should be intentional. Sometimes we look out and something just sort of happens naturally, but we should be making intentional decisions for every factor to help us get the truth, including the location and the environment of our conversations. Adapting to our subject needs is another super important. When we think about subject, again, that could be person we're interviewing, it could be a family member, it could be a business associate, it could be an employee, job candidate, it could be anybody. Remember, if somebody else has information and we need it, they're in control of the conversation. So I'm not going to completely acquiesce to them, but I'm also not going to pull them into the conversation 10 minutes before their lunch break, or they expect to go home to pick up their kid. That's not going to work to my advantage. It's going to create much more resistance. So to the best that I can, I want to try to schedule an important conversation at a time and at a location that is at the very least not going to inconvenience this person, and hopefully maybe even add to their convenience, add to their comfort level. That I might even change the color shirt that I'm wearing. Am I wearing a suit or am I wearing jeans? Am I wearing my glasses or not, depending on the conversation? Which watch do I wear for the conversation? All these things sound silly, but they can be important. Honestly, am I the one leading the conversation or not? There have been multiple times in my career where I sat in front of a room full of people assuming I was going to be the lead interviewer, and they looked at me and said, "Mike, you're out. We're using this person." I can be offended, or I can realize that based on the totality of the situation, that person statistically has the best chance to get the truth, so they should be the one to lead the conversation. The outcome should always be the most important thing. And if we're prioritizing outcomes, then we should be adjusting our approach to meet, or hopefully at least acknowledge, the needs of the people we're speaking with in order to help us achieve those goals. Also, it is super important to maximize the pre-conversation and post-conversation evidence collection, information collection. Oftentimes we can go into a conversation thinking, well, I didn't have time to do any pre-work. I didn't have time to do any prep. I'm just going to have the conversation. Well, if we have the conversation and we're not an expert in the topic, we haven't uncovered every rock, turned over every rock that we were able to, it's much easier for us to get fooled, to believe an untruth, to accept an explanation, or maybe sign on to something that's unrealistic. Again, we'll probably come back at another point. We'll get into verbal and nonverbal communication. But if you really want to verify if somebody is telling you the truth or not, the absolute best way to do that is to capture as much ground truth as you can prior to the conversation, gather new and compare it, keep it in your back pocket. Don't share it. Don't tell anybody that you got it. That's your secret. You don't play poker with your cards facing your opponent, right? We gather that information, we keep it in our back pocket, and now we compare everything we hear and experience to what we already know. Then after the conversation, we take the new information we learned and we go see if we can confirm it with objective ground truth information. That is the best way to verify if we were getting the whole story. No two ways about it. That's the best way to do it. You want to add more value to your observations? Well, we got to have a goal. But also, if we have ground truth to compare it to, now we can start judging the veracity, the honesty, the thoroughness, the willingness, the cooperativeness of the people that we're speaking with based on how the information they share compares to what we already know and will compare to what we can find out later. So please, especially if the conversation is important enough, maximize your preparation effort. It doesn't always take a lot of time, but if you ask other people the questions you need to, if you go back and look through the emails, the communications, the document history, if you do an internet search, a social media search, whatever it is, get as much ground truth as you can prior to entering into the conversation. It will make your observations easier. It will limit your internal monologue. It will help build confidence. And after the conversation, it will help validate the decisions you're going to make based on the information you've collected. Do not miss out on that opportunity. So now we're in the conversation. we're going to be speaking with somebody, and we want to do the best we can to understand where they're at, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and how that impacts our ability to build this relationship, achieve our goals, and capture truthful information. There's a process to that. We can't just go in and say, oh, look, they tapped their foot. They're lying. Oh, look, they broke eye contact. They're lying. Oh, look, they scratched their nose. Oh, look, they adjusted their shirt. All of these things could mean no less than a dozen different things depending on the context of the situation. We can't know what somebody's uncomfortable behavior looks like until we got a reasonable idea of what their comfortable behavior looks like first. So what we want to do at the start of any conversation that's important to us, high impact, high value conversation, is spend a little bit of time trying to establish as best we can a reasonable behavioral baseline. So how are they interacting with you in a way where their comfort level, I should say this way, where they're not super uncomfortable. So if you're a CEO and you call somebody into your office and say, come in, sit down and shut the door, they're going to be uncomfortable. They think they're getting fired. If you're a parent and you tell your son or daughter to come sit down next to me, they're going to be uncomfortable because they think they're getting grounded. People assume the worst under ambiguous circumstances, especially with authority figures. So again, we got to keep the context in mind. But in the beginning of the conversation, instead of just chatting them up, hey, how was your weekend? Did you see the game? How was your son's soccer game? Did you get you going on your bike this weekend? Whatever it is. Have a strategically valuable rapport building conversation for the first 90 seconds to 2 minutes. Ask them a couple of questions that they should have no real stress answering. Hopefully you have a relative idea how honest their answer is based on previous experience or knowledge or investigation potentially. And now you can start to gauge what do they look, act, and sound like when you can be reasonably confident that they're relatively comfortable and honest. That becomes their baseline for future comparison. Boom. That's got to get done first. Once we have that done, now as the conversation goes on, we're not looking for truth and lie. Let me make that clear. What we are looking are for shifts in their comfort levels. So if while they are telling you something, all of a sudden they look a lot more or a lot less comfortable, something shifted. If while I'm talking to them, on time to something that I say, all of a sudden they look much more comfortable or much less comfortable, something shifted. They had an internal reaction to what I just said. Maybe we're just having a perfectly normal conversation. Something happens in the environment around us. They look more or less comfortable. I want to clock that too. Did somebody else just walk in the room that changes the dynamic of this conversation? Did something come up on the TV? Changes the dynamic of this conversation. Is their phone on the table? Did it start ringing? And that changed the dynamic of this conversation. We've got to be hyper aware to all of these things going on around us. Again, we'll come back some other time to verbal and nonverbal communication specifics, but all we should be looking for is changes in their comfort level. Everybody listening to this conversation right now has a general idea of what the people in their life often look like when they're comfortable and uncomfortable. Let's just start with that. So now here's where we have to start doing some math. If we have a baseline and we see their comfort level shift away from that baseline during the conversation, when a behavior changes is way more important than what behavior changes. So now what we need to do is we need to ask ourselves, what was the trigger that caused this behavior to change? What were they saying? What was I saying? What was going on in the environment? What happened right before or as that behavior was changing? Now, if we can correlate the behavioral shift to the trigger that caused it and evaluate it within the context of the situation, we can start getting a really clear picture about what the person in front of us is thinking and feeling in that moment in time. But we have to be able to go through all of the steps to get there. It can't be they broke eye contact, they're lying. It can't be they scratched their nose, they're nervous. It can't be they're crossed their arms, they're uncomfortable. We'll come back and talk about how a bunch of these things actually are untrue, not even partially sometimes true. So that contextual awareness is the big piece at the end. If we really want to accurately evaluate somebody's communication at any moment in time, got to have a baseline first. We got to look for a deviation in their behavior, a change in their comfort level away from the baseline. We have to be able to confidently assign that behavioral change to a trigger that caused it. And then we have to evaluate it within the context of the situation. So essentially, when we see that behavior change, the question we like to ask ourselves is, why did that behavior shift occur on time to this trigger in the context of this situation? If we can answer that question, why did that behavioral shift occur on time to that trigger in the context of this situation, we are now far more likely to have a pretty accurate read on what's going on. And if you really want to take your observation to the next level, once we feel like we've done a good job answering that question to ourselves, the next question we should ask ourselves is, how does this information help me achieve my goal? If I know what someone is likely thinking and feeling right now, how does knowing that help me achieve my goal? What do I now say or do differently in order to capitalize on that emotional shift to achieve the goal that I need to achieve? Now, having gone through all of that, there is something that I want to stress. Single factor decisions can be deadly. That's true in observations. Honestly, it's probably true in life. I don't want to just look at one behavior changed. Their foot fidgeted. They touched their ear. Their blink rate changed. They broke eye contact. They're biting their lip. They're playing with their shirt. They shuffled in their chair. Any one thing, I can't just focus on one thing. Single factor decisions are deadly. What we want to do is position ourselves in a way, preferably capitalizing on the size of proxemics, roughly 4 feet apart with no barriers in between us. Socially, that's often how we position ourselves in professional environments. If I can see the totality of the person in front of me through my peripheral vision, please don't constantly be scanning them, right? If I'm looking directly at them, I should be able to see the rest of them with my peripheral vision. I want to look for multiple behaviors that shift at the same time. The more an emotion shifts on the inside, the more behavior typically changes to show that emotion leaking on the outside. So the stronger the emotional shift, the more leakage we should see on the outside. I don't want to focus on just one thing. I want to focus on groups of behavior that shift, that tell me that there is an emotional change, their comfort level is shifting, and we can move on. Also, I know I've teased a couple nonverbal things. Let me just get a couple out of the way right now. The single greatest myth globally associated with dishonesty is broken eye contact. And the science is settled on this. There is no correlation whatsoever between broken eye contact and truth or dishonesty. None. We will generally maintain eye contact within our own individual norms and our cultural norms as long as we're feeling comfortable. And we will generally break eye contact, again, within our outside, in this case, our own personal norms and cultural norms when we are feeling uncomfortable. Also, the crossed arms. People tend to assume that when people cross their arms, they're defensive. People cross their arms for 2 reasons: physical comfort and emotional vulnerability. So we have to be more in tune to the potential idea of physical comfort. And we also have to pay more attention to the rest of their behavior, facial expressions, posture changes, in order to get an idea of the emotional vulnerability that they might be experiencing when they cross their arms, because there's a good chance it's not defensiveness that they're experiencing at that point in time. So to try to bring this whole thing home, when we think about how the most successful investigative interviewers capitalize on their observation opportunities in their high impact conversations, they aren't biased, they're not accusatory, they are certainly not judgmental, and they're not cynical. They are strategic, they are empathetic, they are goal-oriented and outcome-focused, which allows them to be prepared and opportunistic in the conversation. They prioritize the truth and the relationship required to get to the truth over everything else. If in our daily life, we can learn to apply a more systematic, strategic, and situationally aware communication process in all of our high impact conversations, we will find ourselves asking ourselves, what did I miss? How did I not know? Far less often, because we will be capturing the majority of the intelligence presented in front of us, evaluating it in the context of the situation against the goals and outcomes we're looking to achieve, and using it to our advantage to move our relationships and our initiatives forward. Apply the strategy, apply the systems, increase your situational awareness. That's a topic we probably need to dedicate a whole episode to as well. I really appreciate you being here for another episode. Thank you so much. Hopefully this conversation maybe reframed your expectations of interrogators for one, but also helped give you some new perspectives, tools, and considerations for when you're observing people in your high impact conversations. We appreciate you being here now twice a week, every week. Thank you so very much. Please, before you go, like the show, please leave us your feedback and request any topics. We would love that. Certainly subscribe to the show, share it with your network. We really appreciate it. Stay safe, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.